we want to welcome Michelle West. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Let's get right to it. Every story has a beginning, so I want to know, what was your upbringing like? How did it all start for you?
Well, I was raised in a two-parent home. My parents stayed married together over 54 years until my mother passed. Both were Christians, so I was raised in a Christian home going to church. They both were heavy into education, and my dad being retired military, he was big into serving country.
Wow, that's very interesting that you mentioned about the military. What was that like at a young age, just going from city to city? I hate to use this term, being like a military brat. Or what was that kind of like? Was it hard to adjust and try to get acclimated with a new city and things of that nature? What was that like?
For me, it was excellent. It did help define my character. I never felt that I was limited to any one particular place. I got to meet all kinds of people and realize that every culture, every person have similarities that we all can build upon. So I loved moving. I never felt that I had to get my core from any one place. It all came together to create who I am now.
Awesome to hear. So now, while you were growing up, were you involved in any recreation leagues, or was sports just something that you just did for fun?
Well, I was around family members who were athletes. My brother himself was a martial artist, and so I saw sports, but never realized what my knack was until it was called into play at 5, approximately 5, between 5 and 6. I was playing outside with my cousins in my aunt's front yard and heard some noise, one of my cousins calling out, and happened to look. I could see from the front yard into the window where my cousin was, and her then husband was choking her. And that's when automatically it just kicked in, a sense of wanting to protect her by all means. So I ran through the yard, up on the porch, went through the front door, and I just felt at that time, go through the door, jump onto the bed, off the bed, onto him, put your bicep in his throat. And so that's what I did. At 5 years old, I ran through the house, busted through the door, jumped on the bed, off of it, onto him, and I just put my bicep as close to his throat as I could and just kept squeezing until I heard my cousin actually tell me, "Let him go, you're killing him." And as a 5-year-old, I couldn't comprehend that, so I let him go. But at that time, he had already dropped to his knees and he was spitting out white stuff. So it wasn't only until years later that I realized what I had done, medically speaking, because I went into medical and was able to understand that what the body was actually doing at the time. So he was close to passing out. But from that point on, he never laid his hand on her again. And it was my parents, years later, my parents were told by my cousin, because he was, every time I got in the same room that he was in, he would leave or he would not want to be around me. So my parents kept questioning why that was. And my cousin then told them that not only had I saved her life, she did end up miscarrying, but that she was able to have 3 more healthy kids after that because I was a part of saving her life. So
that's some way to be introduced to sports. You mentioned that your family members were involved and your brother was involved in the martial arts, and certainly you mimicked kind of some things, some of the moves that he learned. But I want to ask you, goes into our next question, your introduction to sports. How old were you when you received formal training in the martial arts?
It was only after my parents had learned of the incident. At the time, my dad was stationed in Bitburg, Germany on the Air Force Base. And when we got back from visiting family, that's when he enrolled me in karate classes on base.
What form of martial arts was it? Was it judo or taekwondo?
It was karate. At
karate,
that point,
okay.
Yes. Then he got stationed in Arizona, And when we got to Arizona, he put me in judo to help me understand the ground game, because karate most was, standing. If somebody comes to you and you're standing, this is what you do. But he wanted me as a female to be able to handle myself if I was ever tackled or taken to the ground or somebody was trying to take advantage of me in any way. As a female, he wanted me prepared for that as well.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. A smart man right there, and you definitely were prepared for that. Because did you compete in any tournaments?
I did. I competed mostly in traditional martial art, not so much in judo, but I did go to several tournaments and end up at the age of 13 winning the Texas State Championship. So I did get a lot of hands-on training in professional manner and streetwise. So
after you received your formal training in martial arts, you wind up getting into an interesting sport that is still somewhat of a cult sport, but it's had a interesting following, and that's the world of bodybuilding. How did you get involved in the sport?
Right after winning the Texas State Championship, big issue that I had was my size. I was really small. I was fast and ferocious, if you want to call it. But the issue was I was just small. And so the sensei that I had at the time, Thane McVeigh, he was also a bodybuilder on the side, and he did some acting. So he kind of took me up as a protege and started teaching me how to lift weights so that my size would not affect me going forward. And once that started, I fell in love with lifting. It was something that came very natural to me. And even when I went in the military, I was lifting weights that a lot of the men around me were not lifting. So it became second nature to me to want to lift. So after getting out of the military, I decided to actually start competing, and it just was that much more that I realized that I really love the sport.
Can you tell us how many titles have you won during your career?
It's not so many. I had an opportunity at a very quickly into my career to go to the Nationals in Chicago, and it was my only second show, and won fourth in junior nationals at Chicago, which from what I'm told years later, that's impossible, that most people had been in bodybuilding for 5 to 10 years before they would ever reach that pinnacle. I had a lot of pros around me, and I had a really good trainer. Johnny Jackson was my first trainer, and he kind of showed me the ropes of the pro bodybuilding world. And after him, I had Robert Mannix, who, wonderful man, was kind of like a father figure to me. He was like Rocky had Mickey and I had him. And he really showed me how to just pass the appearance of being physically fit, actually being physically fit. So I enjoyed being under him for many years. I then took some time off because I was doing other things with martial arts, and I went into federal protection for a while. And during all this time, I decided to go back and compete again, ended up getting first in Masters, because at that time I was over the age of 35. So I did get a first in that, and a couple of other trophies, including best routine. So it's definitely a part of my life.
You haven't received your pro card yet. Is it something that you aspire to achieve, or it's just something you just take it as it comes along?
If I get it, that's wonderful. I see bodybuilding as a way to not only be the way God intended us to be. I failed to share this. When I was really young, I was actually in an elementary school, there was a poster on the board, of course, in the science class, and I realized then, looking at that anatomical chart, that a lot of people do not look like that. I would look at the chart, and I would look at the people around me, and I'm like, they are not comparing to this chart. But the only people that I found years later that did look like that chart were bodybuilders, trying to tone and tweak their muscles to be the perfect shape. And I think that is a way of life. Regardless if I'm on stage or not, that is a way of life. And I love to share that with people. Not everybody's going to get on a stage. I try to take them to their peak, whatever their physique is, the best condition that their physique can be in for whatever they're doing in life. So to me, being a bodybuilder is always going to be a part of me on and off stage.
Interesting. Well put answer right there. I want to ask you one more thing about the sport that you're associated with in bodybuilding. There's always this dark cloud hanging over it. You know, it's steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. I just wanted to know, have you always been natural? Have you used them before?
I am natural. I have had opportunities where my doctor actually put me on something because I have something called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So my body automatically produces more testosterone than the average female. Not to get too deep into science, but for someone who has polycystic ovarian syndrome, it takes what the body does naturally a step further. And most females, well, unless they have issues with childbearing, when they are bearing a child, their testosterone levels exceed normal levels in order to supply that child with the genetics needed for it to become a boy. But usually once the child is born, those numbers drop back to normal levels. Well, in my case, my body was a little different. My blood looks a lot like a diabetic. So the more I eat, the more sugar I take in. Instead of my body using insulin to break that down, my hormones, they'll get into me all the particulars, but my hormones fluctuate in order for my body to break that down. So the more I ate, the more testosterone I created naturally. The more I lifted, and my body was calling for that, of course, the more you lift, the more you crave, you eat to keep up with the body's demands, the more testosterone my body would create. So I actually was placed on steroids by a OBGYN to try to even out my body. So as your question is, yes, by a doctor I was put on, but not necessarily for gaining muscle, but it was to keep my body from getting too out of whack.
Oh, wow, very interesting right there. You know, I think what's so interesting about it is that you really explained that thoroughly as to how you got on, how you were, you know, prescribed steroids medically because of the situation that you had. So that's very interesting. I have to ask you, with you being prescribed those steroids by a doctor, did it interfere with your training, or you didn't have any problems in regards to your bodybuilding career?
I didn't notice that it affected my lifting. My eating did. When I ate right, the better I lifted, the bigger I got, the better my body reacted. There was a time where I was also put on something stronger, was after I had a car accident and I had Bose disc, and so I had a lot of back issues. So I was placed on steroids again at that time for my back to heal. At that time, I did notice changes because that particular steroid was for rehabilitation for the muscles. So at that time, I did notice a little more size. I was more hungry. I did get stronger, and my body reacted quicker. But there's one thing I want to get perfectly clear to anyone who questions whether or not steroids are good or bad. My issue is education. I more rather, and I was asked this question when I was going for my bachelor's degree because I was taking strength and conditioning, is should kids be allowed, not kids as in underage, but should people be allowed to be given steroids? And my thing is, steroids is not what makes the athlete. The athlete still has to eat right, work out, and do right. Steroids doesn't magically change the person. 1 minute they're frail and don't have any muscle tone, and then the next minute they're Hercules. That is not the reality of it. There's a lot of work that goes in. Now, people choose to take steroids in order to help them recover from the damage that sometimes lifting and stuff can do in order for their body to process that quicker. That is realistic. Now, if you're asking me if people should be given steroids, I do not believe that kids getting shots in the back of an athletic center by a stranger and they don't know what they're getting, I do not agree with that. But under parent supervision and doctors being involved, I believe in a case of that, to keep as a prevention, to keep a child from blowing out their knees or their muscles and body developing unevenly, which could affect them in life, period. I do believe that there is room for parents and doctors to be in on making sure that their child develops properly.
I want to ask you, while competing, did you ever kind of feel that you were outmatched? Because certainly I know you, in bodybuilding, you always pay attention to your competition, and I wanted to know, did you ever feel that you're outmatched because of what other competitors may be taking, or did that issue ever cross your mind?
My shortest answer to that is no. People that treat their bodies as though it is a temporary vessel will reap that. So if a person is willing to do things that is going to end up hurting them in the future, it will come back to bite them. I don't want to do to myself what somebody else is doing just because I think for that moment it's going to make me a better person. So I didn't look at that. I looked at how could I come to that contest in the best shape that I could come in that contest as, in a healthy way. And so whatever was done on stage, whatever the judges determined, I was willing to accept as long as I know that I brought it.
Where can they find you on social media?
I have both Twitter and Facebook account for Fit Your Body to Honor God, which is the book that I wrote. You can also find us on our website, which is www.templetalents.com. That's TEMPLETALENTS.com.
Okay, one last question before I let you go. Tell our audience just about the book that you wrote and just what's it all about.
I was very blessed to go to a college that is $41,000+ a year. When I was going to TCU, my main focus at the end of that was how can I turn that expensive education into a $12 book that people can just reference anytime. No, you don't have every detail of every class that I took, but for the average person just wanting to lose weight or make their body better, tone up, or even may be interested in going to the extreme and going to bodybuilding, I have a chapter to reach each and every one of you. If you're at home and can't get out to the gym, there's a chapter for you. If you just want to know basic nutrition, there's a chapter for you. If there's a love for the gym and you go all the time, but things aren't just tweaking in, there's a chapter for you. And if you just want to go all out and get on the stage, there's a chapter for you too. So that's what the book incorporates.
Well, you heard it from her. She's Michelle West. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into the channel. Remember to click like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for watching.